Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Blender tutorial series that teaches you how to make the Spirited Away shot piece by piece by piece. And in this part, part two, what we are going to do is take the card that we made from the last part and kind of put it inside a scene that makes sense and give it camera motion. And this is the part that really makes the whole 3D scene come alive. Strangely enough, you don't need the bushes, you don't need the flowers, nothing. You just need very good camera motion. So let's talk about how to do that. This part's very simple but very effective. So again, here's what it looks like. It looks like there's a cameraman following this dude in a checkerboard hallway. He's lost in the game of chess. But in reality, again, it's just like a 2D plate with the camera that we're going to very cleverly animate to give us this effect. So this is the use of using 2D cards. You can still use them. You just have to plan ahead a little. So where did we leave off? We left off with this, a sad little plane that's purple. It shouldn't be. There we go. A sad little plane that nobody appreciates. What we need to do with this is we need to put it inside a scene. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start off by taking our card and just raising it a bit. I want it so that the most lower part of the footage is ground level. That just makes it easy for us. And before we set up the walls or anything, I just want to set up a camera so I know what it's gonna look like when I look out the viewfinder. Either way, take a camera, add it. It always adds it from the perspective that you added it from. So take the rotation, I'm gonna reset it, I'm gonna bring the camera back, and a very obvious, but I guess I should mention it, a very important feature of what we're doing here is the camera should basically be matching the way we filmed it. So in this case, I filmed behind the back, right? There's a camera behind me and the green screen in front of me. Therefore, I'm putting the camera behind me, and we're going to try to match the angle, and then we're just going to add a bit of shake and see what we can get away with. So, okay, so we're setting up our camera. I'm just going to set up a second finder or a second viewport just so we can see what's going on from the camera view. So this is our camera perspective. So I'm going to move it a bit further back, which is going to make this person, me, appear to be smaller. The camera was like not on the ground, it was a bit off the ground, so we're going to do something like that. And key insight, I think when I filmed this, I used something like, I don't know, 35mm lens or whatever. If you can, take your focal length and match it to whatever your shot is. This will just make it easier to fit everything together. So something like 35mm, and now let me just adjust it. By the way, I wasn't perfectly centered when I filmed this. I'm just going to move the card over so it's centered, and now let's play with the camera a bit more. So the camera should definitely be in a position where, well, first of all, it should be closer, but should definitely be in a position where you're not seeing where the legs would be, because that kind of breaks the illusion. So we got to position it strategically. Also, it looks like from the way I filmed this, I'm taller than the camera, which makes sense. I'm like 7 feet tall, very impressive man. So let's try to imitate that. So the rotation, I'm going to tilt this up a bit so it's looking up, and then we're going to bring it down. Again, we're just matching whatever the conditions were when I filmed this. So now we have this kind of from the same perspective, but nothing is moving. So let's give it some movement. Okay. For movement, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a controller in the form of an empty. You'll see why in a second. But this controller is going to be controlling the movement. So I'm going to take the camera and I'm going to take this. By the way, as long as we move these two together, it makes sense. But if you only move the camera, you see what happens. As long as we move these together, it's as if nothing happens. So I'm going to take both of these, parent it to the empty, which means now the empty is, everything is in balance. I'm going to take a keyframe, I for keyframe, add a location one, go to the last frame, move it like down, and we'll figure out exactly how much in a bit. Add another keyframe and make sure you hit T to make this linear interpolation so it's a constant speed. And you can see this is the key. Not the key, this is the basic idea for how you do movement. So how do we figure out how far I should be going? That's a good question, and this is where reference tends to help. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start setting up the hedges and the walls and all that in the kind of the most basic form. So instead of adding in like the botanique shrubs and all this, for now let's just mess around with some cubes. So take a cube, make it the size that you want your hedge to be and the position you want it to be, so it should be off to the side. Make sure it's not too close or the arm is going to clip the cube in 3D space. So get it kind of as close as you can, since the whole idea is it's supposed to be kind of like a narrow scene in this one. The hedge is going to be this tall. It should be going down to where my feet would be. And it's kind of weird. I'm always facing away from you. no matter where you go. It's kind of like a horror movie illusion right there. And the hedge goes very far back, and we can decide how far back later. But so that's one. Is that kind of the position we want for it? I think it is. Maybe we can move it a bit forward or a bit back, really. Something like that. Take it. We're just going to duplicate it and put it there. So now it looks like I'm walking through a 3D scene. Again, not enough reference or perspective or whatever. We can't really tell what's going on. So just a quick fix, I'm going to make a checkerboard material like I did in the demo. And for this checkerboard, pretty simple. Just everything's the same, except we're going to hook up a checkerboard to the principled BSDF space color. And let's use object coordinates so we don't have any of this like stretching going on. So something like that. Take it and make it apply to both of these. Did I apply the wrong material? I must have. Checker. There we go. So now we have perspective in some sense for how fast I'm going. Again, this is the kind of thing we eyeball, but with the help of this checkerboard and the ground plane, you can kind of tell, am I walking too fast or too slow? Well, I'm kind of taking a casual walking kind of gait, so this is like almost perfect. If anything, it's just a tiny bit too fast. So I'm just going to go to the last frame, bring back our empty a bit, keyframe, and now I'll be going a bit slower. So just kind of imagine, and it's a very forgiving process. You don't need to get it that accurate. So from the camera view, this is what we have. It looks like 3D, but it kind of just looks like the guy got green screen and we're putting 3D graphics in the background, which is what's happening, but we could do a lot better. So the key to make it, I swear to God, I've been saying key so many times in this tutorial. The main thing you can do to make this motion look very, very real is we want the camera to operate like a real camera, like it's being held and it's shaking and it's getting further and closer away from this 2D card. We can actually simulate all of these things, and this is why I said earlier that we put this empty here for a reason, because now, since everything's parented to this, I can like move the camera and it's still moving together. So I can make these like secondary decisions now. So let's make some of those. I'm going to keyframe the camera. The reason I'm doing this is now when we go to the graph editor, you can see that there's actually information here. If I didn't add a location keyframe, this would have been empty. So you've probably seen this before in another tutorial I've made. We're going to be adding wiggle expressions. So first thing we can do is let's have randomness. So we're just choosing where do we want randomness. Let's add randomness to the Z channel as if the cameraman's walking behind him and he's walking up and down and the camera's bobbing. So that's Z location. I'm going to take this, hit the N menu, go to modifiers and add in a noise. In other words, I'm taking this, it was just some value, some Z value that we keyframed, and I'm just adding some randomness to it. So you can see it's a lot. To make it look smoother, we're going to take the scale and bring this up. This is kind of like the speed at which this motion happens. And the second one is the strength at which it happens. So I'm going to make it more subtle. So 0.1 makes it like a tenth as strong. Already looks much, much better. So you can see the camera's going up and down a bit. One more thing we can do, add a bit of depth. Let me see if I can show you the full graph here. I'm trying to only isolate Z location. I don't know if I can do that. Either way, we have this graph. There we go. We have this graph for Z location, and it's very smooth, and it's what we want, but it's very smooth. This depth value is a good way to add in some sharpness to it while still maintaining the overall form. In practice, when you add a bit of depth, what this looks like is the motions won't be so sharp, they'll be much sharper. They won't be like the smooth thing. It will be like a real cameraman where some steps are a bit harsher than others, etc. So I just like having the depth not at 0, but at least at 1. I'm going to take this modifier that we just made, copy it, go to the X location, which is going to be the swaying from, it's going to be the swaying from side to side relative to the, 2D card. And I'm just going to paste it so we can just reuse it. You want to make sure you offset it a bit so it's not the exact same graph for both of these. So X and Z are independent. And you can see now it's doing that. So I'm going to take the strength, bring it up. So the motion from left to right is going to be a bit stronger than up to down. And to compensate, I'm just going to also make it slower. Okay, so already that's looking much better. Y location's very interesting. I used it a lot more for the other shot where our Chihiro actress, my friend, was running towards the camera. Y location is useful for getting the camera to be closer and further away, as if the cameraman's not maintaining perfect distance with the person. I'm going to add in a bit of this, but in this case, I don't want too much. So I'm going to add in a bit of Y location. I'm going to make the scale bigger, and I'm going to move the offset. So now it's kind of hard to tell, but the distance between the card and the camera is not constant anymore. Which is also a very realistic thing to have. For this one, I'm going to bring the depth down so it is smooth in this case. Okay, so that's layer 1 of motion, but we could do a lot better. The rotation is another section where things get real. So the rotation of the camera gives us a different kind of motion. X rotation is seen as the one that should be most violent, this up and down, because if steps are going up and down, then the camera would wobble in that direction on the x-axis. So let's do that. So on the first frame, let's keyframe rotation just like last time. So now we have this information, and let's make a new modifier. So just paste the old one, and we're just going to mess with this one a bit. So here's what it looks like currently. And you can see already it looks like a much more organic camera motion. I'm going to keep the depth. I'm just going to move the offset, and I kind of do like where it is right now. So maybe I'll just keep it as is. I'm just going to take this, copy our progress. Z rotation is this left to right. There should definitely be a bit of that. So let's do some of that. This one I want to be kind of more slow, but also kind of more intense. So that's why I'm just modifying these numbers. And I think the depth for this one should also be kind of a smooth motion. And let's make it even slower. Okay? So there we go. There's some camera motion. It looks like a cameraman who isn't perfect at his job is trying to follow this guy, which is perfect. Y rotation, I'm not going to mess with. This is this kind of tilting. I'm just not going to do any. But so we have a cameraman, he's following, but whoops, every once in a while you can see that I don't have legs. So a couple ways to fix it. One, you can in general just move the camera closer. Two, you can mess around with these offset values until we just so happen to get a random, and let me zoom in here so you can see. When we change the offset, we get different, kinds of things going on. We could just so happen to get the right thing. In this case, I think Z location is the only one we'd actually need to worry about, but more reliable method, just take the camera and zoom it in a bit. It doesn't matter too much. Zoom it in so we just have a bit of wiggle room and we don't need to worry too much about this. And just to see what it's going to look like, let's take viewport display, passer part out, which I always pronounce incorrectly, increase that, and that's going to give us this kind of view. So you can see it is just a card, but this camera motion and the walls and everything moving together the way it would in 3D space just makes it feel a lot more real. So if instead these walls looked realistic and this environment looked realistic and the lighting looked realistic, you can see how we could get a very believable shot. Like this already looks pretty real to me. Now, by the way, some of this like weird lighting stuff, it's just because like we have this light right here and then it's passing through it. We're going to like take care of that. But really, the key thing there I go again. The thing we're going to do to fix this is whatever lighting situation we're going to make, we're also going to parent it to the empty so it moves together. In fact, we could do that right now, just to demo. So I'm just going to move my light where I want it, bring it a bit down. Again, this is lighting our actor, which is a cool side effect. Take it, parent it to the empty, and this is just going to make the lighting move with it, which may or may not be what you want. By the way, also, if you intend to render an EV, which we're not going to, but if you do, and you're seeing there's this weird line where it intersects the walls, that's another material issue. So just go to material, go to not alpha or not to blend mode, but to shadow mode, and set this to one of these others, like alpha clipped, I believe. And you can see that solves the issue. And it actually also, cool side effect, gives us the shadow and the shape of the person. Which is another thing that makes it look real. But you can see, okay, that looks good. It really does, especially if we freeze frame, let the soft shadows calculate. So I think I'm happy with that. When we render this, whatever we add to it, there's going to be motion blur, which is just another thing that's going to make it look good. But there you go. That's part 2, taking your 2D card and keep hitting the wall and setting it up in a scene where from the camera view, it looks pretty real, the motion. So there you have it. let's go back to the main screen. And we've gone to my favorite part of the tutorial, Patreon. It exists. Why am I telling you about it? Well, for this tutorial series, especially if you're watching it as it comes out, I am uploading these things faster than it seems. I'm taking some of the videos, making them unlisted, and it's early access for patrons. So if you join Patreon, you could watch maybe the next part if I've uploaded it. So I'm recording multiple in a row. That exists on Patreon, but there's also a ton of other benefits. So there's early access to tutorials, exclusive tutorials that I do not post on either YouTube channel, this one, or the CG Matter one. Occasionally I make exclusive tutorials, blend files if you want to follow along and actually have the blend and the green screen footage to work with. You can do that as well. All of this exists on Patreon. I want to thank all 780 some, it fluctuates, active patrons for supporting this channel and making this a thing that I can upload for free. I really considered making this a paid course because I think it's good shit, but I'm like, make it for free. I can, why not? So thank you, patrons, for making that a reality. Anyways, that's it for me, and I'll see you guys on part 3, which I probably won't record today, but yeah, we'll see.